Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing wonderfully well. How are you? I'm fine, thank you very much, and all the better for being with you tonight. So don't forget to get that quintessential glass of drink, whatever it is, and if you drink something spectacularly different, please let me know about it, because it's fascinating. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your listeners, imagine for a moment waking up and not knowing who and where you are. And when you look at your own face in the mirror, you're astonished and confused because the face that stares back at you is so unfamiliar. For a second, you believe that you're looking at somebody else. It has to be someone else. And when you realise you're looking at your own face, which seems like a stranger or imposter, it's exceedingly disturbing. That was indeed my horrific experience when I woke up in a hospital ward in the summer of 1963. The nurses and the doctors were so thrilled to see me finally awake. They were running around me frantically, and I remember feeling very befuddled, muddled and disorientated, and it wasn't a good experience at all. Why was I in hospital, I wondered, and what on earth was all this outrageous fuss about? "Move away," said one of the doctors to the nurses, who were crowding around me excitedly, saying, "Our patient's awake! She's awake! She's awake! Doc, she's awake!" The doctor moved towards the side of my bed. "Don't overwhelm the poor girl," he exclaimed to the crowd of nurses that were gathering around me like a flock of honking geese. "You need to give her space, for goodness sake." "Hello, and how is my patient doing this morning? I must say you're looking a whole lot brighter than when I last saw you," he said, smiling at me with a broad beam on his face. I knew he was a doctor because he was wearing a white jacket with a stethoscope hanging over his shoulders, and he had a kindly bedside manner, which I found very reassuring. What on earth was I doing here in the hospital, I kept wondering to myself, and why were so many people gathered around me, watching me, as if I was some kind of spectacle or attraction you would find at the zoo? "I'm Dr. Wayne Fitzpatrick," said the man. "How are you feeling this morning?" "I'm not actually sure," I said. "Have I been in some kind of accident? I have no memory of anything of what happened to me." "I was hoping that you would give me the answer to that," he said, looking at me with gentle blue eyes that displayed a genuine empathy and understanding. "Let's start with the easy stuff first, shall we? And then progress from there. I'm going to ask you some questions to establish what it is that you can remember." "What is your name?" the doctor asked. "Now that is a good start." "My name," I said, stammering and looking confused. I thought I had it on the tip of my tongue. I really did, Doc. I do think I remember my name. What is it? It begins with an... I think it's an S. But I can't be certain either. I can't relate... I don't know what's going on with me. I don't think I can remember it," I said with a mortified expression. "Why can I not remember my own name, Doc? This is absolutely ridiculous. What's going on?" "Do you know what year it is?" he asked me. I can't remember," I said, looking increasingly frustrated. "Oh, this is crazy. I can't even remember who's the President of the United States. I don't understand, Doc." "Calm down," said the doctor. "You mustn't be so hard on yourself. You've only just woken up. Let me refresh your memory, shall I? It's June the 21st, 1963. And the President is Lyndon Baines Johnson. Does that bring back any memories?" "No, it doesn't sound familiar at all, Doctor." "Well, you're a mystery patient here, in Washington State. You were found wandering in the middle of the road in a nightgown, with blood running down your face, and a huge open gash on your head. Now it appears that someone hit you exceedingly hard, which has caused you memory loss. Can you remember anything at all? Do you know who might have hurt you? And what form of weapon they used to hit you with?" The tears poured down my cheeks. "Doc," I said, "I can't even remember my own name. How can I remember that? Is something going on with my brain?" "You are suffering from amnesia. It's not uncommon with head injuries like yours. But at this stage we cannot determine whether your memory has been permanently affected or not. We can only hope and pray that it's a temporary condition that will eventually pass. You did sustain some very serious bruising to the brain, and we have run a series of tests, but the trouble is it's way too early to establish your long-term prognosis. It could go either way." "Are you saying that I may never be able to remember again?" I asked. "I'm not sure it'll come to that," said the doctor. "I do think it exceedingly unlikely. The body is a remarkable healer. I've seen miracles, believe me, I have." "Doctor," I exclaimed, "you don't get it, do you? I can't remember a single thing. How would you feel if you were me? I'm really, really scared." "Rest assured," said the doctor, patting me gently on the shoulder. "When your parents finally come forward, they may have a greater idea as to what happened to you. They can fill in the missing blanks. They must already be making inquiries at the police station, I imagine, and filing a missing persons report. You'll be glad to know we've informed the police and the authorities that you're in the hospital, so I'm sure we will find out your name soon enough." "Parents?" I said, looking bewildered. "I have parents. Doc, I don't even remember that," I said, grabbing him by the arm and squeezing it so hard. "I'm scared. I'm really scared. I don't understand why my mind is so blank." "Look," said the doctor, regarding me kindly, "there is no reason why you shouldn't make a full recovery. But as I keep telling you, the body takes a long time to heal. Remember, your brain has been very badly bruised, so you need to recruit patience and a little faith. I have a positive feeling in my gut. You're going to be just fine," he said, giving me a big wink. After that, I must have fallen into a deep sleep, and I was awoken to the sound of hushed, excited voices that were deliberately trying to be very quiet. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to be fast asleep, while I secretly eavesdropped in on the conversation. I wanted to establish if there was anything about my peculiar, outlandish condition that was being kept secret from me. "Oh my, I've been so worried," said the woman. "We woke up in the morning and we couldn't find her anywhere. She had disappeared from the house and had left the front door wide open. We were frantic and besides ourselves with worry. It was like she'd vanished into thin air." "Are you sure that is her?" asked the doctor. "That's my little Penelope," said the woman's voice. "But she has looked better," she joked, trying to add some humour to the equation, to lighten the oppressive atmosphere my condition obviously provoked. "Well, of course she has," said the doctor. "Mrs. Price, I must ask you this. Is there anyone you know that has a vicious vendetta against your daughter?" "You mean someone who wishes to harm her?" "No, doctor, of course not. Penelope is only 15 years old. She hasn't got a single enemy in the entire world. And she's a kind, gentle soul whom everybody loves." "My wife is right," came the deep voice of a man that I assumed was my father. "No one would ever wish to harm our little girl." "Are you saying that someone deliberately beat her up?" he asked, sounding absolutely appalled. "Who would do such a vindictive, evil thing to a 15-year-old girl, of all things?" "I'm afraid someone has beaten her up," said the doctor. "Someone clearly intended to harm your daughter. It's quite frankly a miracle that she did not get killed. That was quite some lashing she took. She hasn't sustained any fractured bones, and that is a miracle, and we can be glad for small blessings, because she did take a very violent thrashing. and this accident was done with a brute force by someone with nefarious intent. When she regains her memory, the police will obviously want to be talking to her." I could hear my mother gasping. "I don't understand, Doctor," she cried. "None of this makes any sense. She is going to be all right, isn't she?" "I'm optimistic about her long-term prognosis, but as is the case with any trauma, she's going to need time. Time is what is always needed in conditions like this. I need to warn you," said the doctor. "When she wakes up, she will be unlikely to remember you, as she sustained a very nasty head injury and bruising to the brain. You need to be gentle, understanding and diplomatic with her, and help her to try and fill in the blanks of who she is. She is heavily sedated and has been given pain medications." So my name was Penelope. I didn't really like that very much. And those strange people talking to the doctors were my parents. I drifted off to sleep and awoke to find a strange woman sitting on the chair beside my bed. She was quite pretty, I thought. Blue eyes, fair skin, and long shoulder-length brown hair. She reminded me of someone. Oh, of course! The strange girl in the mirror that I'd recently established was myself. This must be my mother, for her resemblance to me was uncanny. "Oh, Penelope," said my mother, leaning over to give me a big kiss on the cheek. "You gave your father and I a very big scare. How are you feeling, sweetheart? I must admit, you do look a sorry sight." "I feel stiff and sore," I said, and very, very confused. "Well, of course, that's to be expected, sweetheart," she said, caressing my hand gently. "But the doctor is very optimistic that you will make a full recovery." "You do know who I am?" she asked gently. "Of course, I won't be offended if you don't. I do understand the nature of your condition." "You're my mother," I said. "You look like the strange face in the mirror, which I discovered was me. That's how I know." My mother gave me a gentle squeeze. "You may have lost your memory," she teased, "but your humour is still very much intact. The good news is the doctor says you can come home soon. I can't wait to get you back safe and sound." "Home?" I said, looking blank. "Where is home? I have no memory of that." "You'll find out soon enough," said my mother, planting an affectionate kiss on my forehead. "One step at a time. I think that's the best course of action in the circumstances, don't you?" I still remember the day that I sat at the back of my father's black Buick Riviera, feeling like a fish out of water, completely out of my depth. I was returning home with two people who claimed to be my parents, but to me they felt like outsiders or foreigners. It was overwhelmingly daunting and dispiriting. It was almost like I was a tiny puppy being snatched away from the safe security of my mother, which in my case was the hospital and nurses, and brought home to an alien environment by two strange people who claimed to have my best interests at heart. But the unknowing of what the future held for me was the most terrifying thing of all. I did perceive that these two foreign people did love me, for it was clear to see the concerned devotion in their eyes, as their generous warm energy exuded a very genuine love, which was difficult for me to reciprocate to strangers. Let's face it, love is generated from responses from emotional interactions and meaningful experiences with people. How could I feel this bond that a child feels between its parents when the connection had been snapped and severed, rather like the umbilical cord that joins the baby to the mother? I had no connection at all to my parents. The only way I can describe it is like a seed that is planted in the ground and is watered until it sprouts up and becomes a seedling, and with due care it eventually becomes a little tree, and its roots begin to establish themselves comfortably into the ground, gliding through the soil with a seamless ease, adjusting to the sunlight and the changing of the seasons, with Mother Earth solidified in the certain knowledge of who and what they are, and knowing that they're wanted and loved. If you have no memory of being nurtured or cared for, the nostalgic memories of your lifetime have seemingly been obliterated by an avalanche of hypothetical asteroids that expunge the area of your brain that harbours and stores your memories like a library of records that cannot be recovered nor reclaimed, as the computer system in your brain is either down or has malfunctioned and been deleted. I assure you, losing this valuable, imperative missing information is completely devastating, as it turns your world upside down on its head, and you have to learn all about yourself again and begin to create new memories. You have to rediscover what your interests, what your likes, dislikes and talents are all over again. And you have to develop relationships with people who have known you all your life as if this is the first time you've ever met them. And believe me, that is very difficult and exceedingly awkward and sometimes rather humiliating. So this was my home, I thought, glancing at the countryside with interest. None of it looked remotely familiar, which was very discomposing. Everything was so brand new to me. It was like I was visiting this place for the very first time in my life. "Look on it as an adventure, sweetheart," my mother had said, trying to be positive. "It'll be like rediscovering everything all over again. What's wrong with that?" My father had looked at me awkwardly. "Your mother's right, dear. Don't put too much pressure on yourself. Just live in the moment and concentrate on every day rather than worrying about what you cannot remember." "Have you been lost before?" I asked my mother. "Oh, yes, sweetheart. Once in Rome when your father and I were on our honeymoon. We became completely lost. We had no idea where we were. We tried to ask people for directions, but no one spoke a word of English. Well, at least they claimed they didn't. I was terrified that we would never find our way back to the hotel, as we had even forgotten the name of that. I don't think I've ever been more afraid in my life. Do you remember, Albert?" "Oh, yes, I remember," laughed my father. "We were in a very strange place where they spoke a different language, and we didn't have the faintest clue where we were. It was not a pleasant experience by any manner of means, and the people we encountered, they didn't go out of their way to be very helpful." "Well, that feeling of terror you experienced in Rome, that is what I feel all the time, completely and utterly lost." My parents glanced at each other with aggrieved, overwrought expressions on their faces. I could sense they felt helpless about my situation. "No one said this was going to be easy, sweetheart. If I could, I would change places with you in a heartbeat," said my mother. "It is going to be taxing and gruelling and tiresome on the all of us, much like a laborious uphill journey that we have to embark upon together. But you must remember we're in this as a team, and that you are perfectly safe at home, and that we love you very much. And that's all that counts when push comes to shove." "Your mother's right, sweetheart. But we'll do our level best to fill in all the blanks for you, with photographs and videos from the past. I'm sure it might help you." I said nothing, but stared vacantly out of the window, as we proceeded to drive down the long gravel driveway, towards our large, very attractive symmetrical farmhouse, with whitewashed walls and an unusual English-style thatched roof, and large sash windows, surrounded by a backdrop of panoramic mountainous views, a sparkling silvery lake, some pretty flowery meadows, and on the right-hand side of the valley, a ubiquitous area of wood green. If I was not so caught up in all my personal issues, I would have been beguiled and bedazzled by this wondrous scenery. But sadly, that was not the case on this momentous occasion. How I got through the next few months, I will never know, as adjusting to life was almost certainly onerous, problematic, and exceedingly troublesome. It was like having to learn to read and write all over again. There were times when I didn't want to wake up in the morning, as a challenging day that lay ahead of me seemed momentous, overwhelming, and exceedingly daunting. I would sometimes pray to God to take me away from this very strange place, because I could not bear the loneliness, solitude, and isolation I felt personally, trying to find out who exactly I was. There was a horse in my life that my parents claimed belonged to me. I had no recollection of her. And I'm not kidding, this tender-hearted, instinctual and beloved horse delivered me through some of the most trying, tumultuous, turbulent challenges of my life. Her name was Cinnabar, and from day one I connected with her. As outlandish as this sounds, I absolutely know that Cinnabar could sense that my energy was out of alignment, because she would sniff me and run her dished head with its concave profile and muzzle down my energy meridians, as if in some way she was trying to fix the distortions. After spending time with her, I always felt much more balanced and uplifted, almost as if a heavy, oppressive cloud had been lifted off me, and finally I could see a glimmer of a rainbow on the horizon, an invisible promise of a brighter and happier future. One day, as I was in Cinnabar's stable grooming her coat and talking gently to her, she trotted over to her leather saddle and started lifting it up with her muzzle and whinnying. I could immediately sense that she wanted to go out for a ride. It was strikingly odd, for indeed she had never displayed this level of enthusiasm before. Not that she doesn't enjoy going out for a ride, of course. I wanted to make her happy, so we quickly trotted out of the farm gate, down some of those quaint country roads, lined with Douglas firs, ponderosa pines and spruce trees, and eventually down some well-known horse trails in the area that Cinnabar knew well, that were surrounded by acres of verdant green countryside. All of a sudden, the weather shifted, which isn't uncommon in Washington state, but this transformation was swift and instantaneous, and I could tell a dangerous storm was brewing. The portentous clouds became inauspiciously dark, the sky gloomy and oppressive, and I could hear the terrifying distant booms and crashes of violent thunder that was so ear-piercingly loud it literally caused me to shake in my boots. I was nervous, frightened and fretful, while Cinnabar remained calm and unfazed, but she did sense my angst. Yet despite this, she was in no apparent hurry to get back to the house, which in itself was peculiarly odd, because she wasn't the bravest of horses. All of a sudden the baleful clouds burst open at the seams, and the rain came belting down in torrents, and I knew I needed to get back fast, as across the smouldering dark sky I could see the illuminations of the jagged yellow zigzags of lightning striking the horizon in a sinister, threatening display of perilous-looking fireworks, looming far too close for comfort. There was no doubt that this was one hell of an inhospitable electric storm. In a trice my fear escalated, and I began to breathe heavily, while my heart was booming violently in my chest, and I could feel the vibrations. I was terrified, and my wet clothes were clinging to my body like rags. Cinnabar trotted through the bellicose storm, unperturbed by its imposing pugnacious dangers, while I kept begging her to go faster. "Faster, Cinnabar! Faster, please!" But she maintained her cool with a very steady dignity. By this stage my clothes were completely saturated, and I was shivering from the cold, while my adrenaline was coursing through my veins in a flight and fight response. For this dreadful storm was indeed the galvanic predator that was pursuing me from the clouds, that could strike me down at any given time. All of a sudden my pronounced, heightened, stressful experience that I was currently engaged in seemed to be a catalyst that invoked a strange set of psychological reactions in my body, like electric shock therapy. The only way I can describe it to you is like an axe breaking down the area of my brain that had been shut and walled off for so long. And now I had access to the library of my mind, and the memories just came flooding back, not just in little bits, but all at once. And I was like a kid in a candy store, wanting to remember absolutely everything. My fear transformed into excitement, and after placing Cinnabar in her stable, I raced back to the house, almost slipping over the flagstones in the process, as such was the level of my haste and enthusiasm. "Look at the state of you," said my mother. "You're soaking wet. Get out of those clothes at once, before you freeze half to death. Whatever in God's name induced you to go riding in weather like this?" "Mum," I said, a huge beam growing over my face, while my sopping clothes began to create pools of water on the floor. "I can remember, Mum, I can remember everything. It's all coming back to me." "You can remember what? What can you remember?" asked my mother, looking perturbed. Well, I know that I love you and Dad. I know about Teddy Bear. You know, the one you brought me when I was 6 years old. The huge one. The one with the green eyes. And I remember holidays abroad. I remember the thing you bought me last June for my birthday. I can recall everything. It's like a tsunami of memories. It's all just come flooding back, all at once. That is odd, said my mother. I never imagined your memory would come back in a whirlwind. It's not usually the case. That is extraordinary and miraculous. My mother took me into her arms, and we both embraced and began to cry tears of joy, relief and hope. It was wonderful to know that the woman holding me in my arms was no longer a stranger, but one of my very best friends. So now I've reached the pinnacle point of my story, when things get very interesting indeed, as my memory can unravel the mystery of the missing pieces of the puzzle that had confounded so many, including myself. You're probably officiously speculating as to why I was wandering around aimlessly on a road in the middle of the night, with blood running down my face, completely oblivious to who or where I was. Well, this is the memory of that extraordinary night, directly from the horse's mouth herself, for I do indeed remember the details with a vivid clarity of note. I have always loved being close to nature, and a few weeks before the strange incident, I occasionally took a walk in our wood green, that is a resplendent oasis of statuesque trees and open trails, all carpeted in lacy ferns with boulders and rocky outcrops swathed in luxurious green velvety moss. Not to mention, there's an abundance of indigenous wildlife. For me, this spectacularly beautiful place was always a personal sanctuary, where I could empty my mind of all the stresses of school life. One day I got this inordinate, prodigious feeling that I was being watched. It wasn't a menacing experience by any manner of means, but more a sense that a naughty kid was spying on me, that was desirous of my attention, but was rather shy. I shrugged off this pervasive impression. However, when I retired to bed every night, I always left my curtains drawn wide because I liked the sun streaming in through the room in the early morning hours. I happened to be a very deep sleeper, and I would often awaken to see a strange dark face staring at me through the window. I wasn't scared, as truly I believed the face was embroiled in the fabric and drama of my dreams. When I discovered strange anomalous things left for me on my windowsill, like pretty stones, feathers and birds' nest, I couldn't fathom where on earth they came from. One night I set my alarm for 1 o'clock in the morning and awoke with a start, as that alarm clock of mine could waken the dead. Damn, I thought, switching the horrible thing off. What was I thinking, waking myself up in the middle of the night like this? And that was when I sensed this friendly presence and discerned the rather obscure dark face studying me through the window that seemed to be smiling at me, although the eyes appeared to exude a red eyeshine that was rather intimidating. But I knew I wasn't dreaming, so I switched my bedside light on to see the stranger more clearly. I noticed he was indicating for me to follow him. I wasn't afraid, more inquisitive and intrigued, with a heightened sense of curiosity. So I tiptoed out of the house in my gown and slippers, armed with my flashlight, to see what this creature actually was. I beheld the towering dark silhouette, and it was standing yards away from me, beckoning me, and I walked towards him, seeing him clearly in the dusky darkness through the light of my torch, heightened still further by the soft ethereal luminescence of the full moon. I perceived that to most people this outlandish, curious creature would have been terrifying, even demoniacal if you like, so much so that they would have run for their lives, but not me. All my life I had been very intuitive and extremely sensitive to energy, quick to pick up negative and positive vibrations. This creature reminded me of an 8-foot teddy bear my parents brought me once when I was a little girl. It was easily as tall and as wide, and was covered in long flowing dark hair. The creature's eyes were so kind, and that really got my attention, and the energy he exuded was unconditionally loving, to such an extent that it almost seemed angelic, as outlandish and incongruous as that may sound. The critter beckoned to me with his overlong arms to follow him directly into the woods, which I did without any hesitation. until finally we stood next to a very old oak tree that I am rather familiar with. He began to talk excitedly all at once, as if he couldn't contain his rising level of exuberance. He spoke in a very distinctive native tongue, with words I could not comprehend. But let's just be clear about one thing. He spoke in an eloquent word, in a dialect that I am not acquainted with, using clicks and passionate effusive gestures with his hands. But it was very definitely a language. I watched as the creature put his hand into the hollow tree trunk and pulled out the most exquisite turquoise stone that sparkled like a jewel. To date, I have never ever seen a stone like that before, and I doubt I ever will again, for its brilliance, magnificence, and luminescence was beyond question. But what it was, I cannot imagine. With the sparkling like diamond jewel in his hands, we both admired it together, and he was making it quite clear he wanted me to have this stone, which from my part was astonishing. I did not know how to react to such a generous offer, so I impulsively gave him a warm hug, as so immense was my delight and gratitude. He kept chattering and pointing to the stone, and I knew he was telling me the story about how it was found, but I wish I could understand what he was saying. But truly I felt as if I was in the presence of a really good friend. I can only describe him as being one of the warmest, kindest beings that I have ever had the pleasure to meet, and I stand on that today, as his generosity was unquestionable. All of a sudden, something colossal came thundering and bolting through the undergrowth like an ungainly elephant in musk, and it was in full charge. I say that because the energy it exuded was pernicious, caustic, menacious, and predatory. I could sense it wanted to kill me, and I'm in no doubt about that, because the malevolent look in her eyes turned my blood to ice and caused my skin to crawl. I could see this licentious, sadistic creature was female, with pert breasts and an uncannily similar appearance to my friend, only much smaller in size, but everything about her was demoniacal. I was absolutely petrified, and my heart began to race at 100 miles an hour, and my forehead began to sweat profusely. The hostile female kept pointing to me accusingly, and she was screaming blue murder at the male. It truly was like listening to two people in a foreign language engaging in a mighty brawl or lengthy altercation. I couldn't comprehend a word of it. The next thing I knew was that she began to attack me with her overlong arms, hitting me violently so hard across the head, thrashing me within an inch of my life, that I felt like I'd been thumped by a cricket bat. Everything became blurry, hazy and fuzzy, and I almost passed out. That was how disorientated I became. I could see the female had grabbed the precious jewel that had dropped to the ground during the brief altercation. I watched in amazement as she put the jewel in her mouth and swallowed it. It was clear she was intent on keeping it. She drew back her lips and began to growl at me ferociously. The commotion she made was unlike anything I've ever heard before. It sounded like 3 lions growling at me in unison, rather than one. I will never forget the terror of that growl. It was unlike anything I've heard before. The female creature grabbed me by the arm, and then the strappy, burly male put his overlong muscular arms on her forcefully, thrusting her to the ground with one nimble move. He pinned her down so hard under his gargantuan form and indicated for me to leave the forest at once with his hands. The stroppy female was trying to bite him and was using her legs to kick back at him, but he was unfazed by her futile attempts to escape from his clutches. Of course, I didn't waste any time, but because I was so delirious and confused and disorientated, I just ran and ran, clueless as to where I was actually going. My mind seemed incompetent of making any decisions, and there were times I had no memory. Everything seemed to become vague, ambiguous, nebulous, and undetermined. I slipped into moments of consciousness and unconsciousness. Looking back, I must have just kept running and running, and by the time I reached the road, I was like a walking zombie, as the traumatic effects of my brain injury were beginning to manifest, and I couldn't remember who I was or even where I was. So now you know the story of how I managed to encounter the quirky creature that I now know all these years later is called Bigfoot. The extraordinary thing to this saga is that I never saw the Bigfoots ever again, nor did I feel their presence in the woods since the fatal incident. Whether the creatures were passing through our area, I do not know, but I will never forget the gentle male Bigfoot I encountered, who may have just had a crush on me, for he was a very special soul indeed. Perhaps he chose to avoid me for fear of the female's impending threat upon my safety. As for my horse Cinnabar, despite her own fearful reservations, I think she took me out in the storm selflessly. She discerned that I needed to be shaken out of my amnesia by feeling real fear. And it worked, and for that I'm ever grateful. All this happened a long time ago, and much has changed since then, with the passing of time. But the memories of this catastrophic experience in my life will never be vanquished from my mind. I believe losing my memory is one of the worst things that can happen to a person. So there you are. That's my story. I think that you might be right about that. I think losing your memory has got to be incredibly scary and very, very terrifying. I can't imagine what that must be like when you see everybody who is familiar with you and you don't even recognise them. That would really set my nerves on edge. How would that make you feel? Do let me know in the comments. But before we finish, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And until next time, goodbye and good night.